Finglas, where I sit and listen to the dumpster, to the builder's lorry drive by and remember a story. A story that began approximately 51 years ago, not too far from where I'm sitting here. This is Finglas West. The story I'm talking about began in Finglas South, as I said, 51 years ago. However, that story is another story. This story is not about that story. This story is about the story that came before it. The generation of Dubliners that came before us. If the Dublin my generation grew up in is long gone, what about the one that came before us, where the papers and the journalists branded the city with the worst slums in Europe?
In the 1900s, Dublin was the second most populous city in the British Empire, and also the first metropolis of nationalist Ireland, with significant social and cultural differences within its limits. This was a city of great variety. The city's existence was connected with rich and poor, Catholic and Protestant, Jewish and Quaker. In 1911, Dublin was entering a decade of tremendous transformation, and nothing would stay undisturbed.
Nothing would remain undisturbed because there was going to come events within the city of Dublin at that particular period where even relationships were all going to shift and change.
First, the 1913 lockout reshaped the city's trade and class relations.
Dublin 1913 lockout wasn't only about the lockout, it was about also the conditions that people worked under, and the severity of the conditions was horrendous. It was basically between approximately 20,000 employees against 300 employers, and that went on from around August 1913 to I think September, or whatever it was, in 1914. And it was basically the undercurrent was really the conditions, not only what they lived in, but also what they worked in.
The 1916 Rising, which was followed by the 1919–21 War of Independence and the subsequent Civil War, upended politics and governance. Local events did not cause all of the shifts. Thousands of Dubliners fought in the trenches during World War I. Many never returned home. Those that did were frequently profoundly changed, partly by the war and partly by what had occurred at home while they were abroad.
They were changed radically. It wasn't an uncommon thing to see people who were veterans, really, who were traumatised by what they saw during World War I and World War II. They filled the streets of Dublin, really, I suppose, tenement and impoverishment areas more so. They became people of renown. The city was filled with them, people that were renowned throughout its folklore, I suppose. And then don't forget the women suffered terribly as well during those periods of time.
In 1911, national independence appeared as a faraway dream in comparison to the reality of British authority. At the centre of the city stood Dublin Castle, a massive stone fort built in response to King John's decision in 1204, and the focal point of British power in Ireland.
Dublin Castle was been constructed in 1204 and what would have been an elevated place. Originally the old castle was a Viking settlement.
Ireland had lost its parliament as a result of the Act of Union in 1800, and all political authority in Ireland passed via the castle's gates.
Now, the Act of Union, of all things that would have took place within Dublin, had a huge, absolutely huge effect on the working class people.
The Lord Lieutenant, the Earl of Aberdeen, reigned over the castle in 1911, while Augustin Birrell was the Chief Secretary. The castle's administrative role, as well as the government buildings located in the city's most aristocratic avenues, marked Dublin's colonial life. Bloomsday, the 16th of June 1904, when James Joyce set Ulysses and Leopold Bloom's epic tour of Dublin.
In many ways, looking at it, Joyce Ulysses was really the bridge between what went behind and what went ahead.
The city was transforming as the suburbs expanded in size and significance. Nothing changed the physical look of Dublin more deeply than the growth of transportation. Trams, horses, and bicycles were still popular modes of transportation in Dublin, but the private automobile was gaining popularity. Dublin had a port, although not in the same sense that Belfast, Liverpool, or Glasgow had. The Titanic was launched on April 1, 1911, from the Belfast shipyards of Harland and Wolff. No project of this size could be completed in Dublin. There was no big industrial sector, no sense of place powered by the entrepreneurial instincts of manufacturing entrepreneurs and their staff. There was, of course, industry and inventiveness, such as Sir Howard Grubb's telescope-making enterprise on Observatory Lane in Rathmines. Administration and trade, rather than manufacturing, drove the city's economy. Dublin's port was more of a transit point for British goods transported into Ireland and the agricultural export trade of the city's rural hinterland, not least the cattle boats that sailed at least 7 times a day as part of the 80 weekly sailings to England. However, not far from the Dublin port stood the Monto, which was the largest brothel in Europe. It was the Irish that brought crime to Liverpool in the late 1800s, much like London and the infamous Irish gangs of New York. However, in Dublin, there were gangs, madams, kiphouses, pickpockets and the worst slums Europe had ever seen.
As a writer, became very intrigued with the history and the story of Dublin's working class. And in my latest book, Frankie's Little Miss Madser, this again details the life, the coming-of-age story of Frankie and his tenement experience. Of course, Frankie's story really starts with the Secret Life of Ashley Brown. It's in the it's a trilogy really, and then follows on to The Promise Maker, where his story really opens up. The question arises is, where did these people come from? If Dublin was overpopulated during the times of the famine, the question has to be asked is, well, where did these people come from? In chapter 8 of my fictional book, Molly Gumball, Molly's late mother, May, who is a native of Galway, explains or recounts her beloved city in such a beautiful way, Galway.
The girl's mother's name was May. She was from Galway. May never lost the love she had for her hometown. She shared the same feelings for Ireland's west coast. But her city, she said, was a dynamic, bohemian place of culture, with popular resorts that had beautiful beaches, and a long, winding promenade. Galway was always on her mind. She had promised herself that one day she'd return to her beloved city. She never did, not even for a weekend break. She'd tell the girls about Galway Bay and its lanes and colourful shops, and how the streets were alive with music from buskers from all over the world. "You'll see, I'll bring you there one day. One day, I promise.
Approximately from around the 1500s, the Spanish Arch really became a witness to what was going on in the city of Galway.
The Spanish Arch is one of Galway's historical treasures. Located on the left bank of the Corrib River. Constructed in 1584 as an extension of the 12th century Norman town wall, which stretched from Martin's Tower to the riverbank. It was built by the 34th Mayor of Galway, William Martin. In English it was known as the head of the wall but later became known as the Spanish Arch. It is thought to be a reference to the former merchant trade with Spain and Spanish galleons, which often docked here. In 1477 Christopher Columbus visited the city. In 1755, the Spanish Arch was partially destroyed by a tsunami. In the 1800s, the Eyre family added the Long Walk extension. And until 2006, the Spanish Arch housed the Galway City Museum, which has now moved to a new location 50 yards away behind the original museum building.
The prevalent British view of the famine, Coogan writes, was that it resulted from a flaw in the Irish character. The fecklessness and laziness that produced the potato economy also produced the other ills that afflicted the unhappy country. Famine was horrible, but seen from some corners of Whitehall as necessary.
Seen as necessary, this is what Coogan had written. It belonged to the British. But the fact of the matter is, in 1847, poor little 6-year-old Celia Griffin, who travelled in Galway 22 miles with her family, then died. When the autopsy was done, it was said that she died of severe starvation, and yet it was seen as necessary. As clearly documented, the famine had a horrendous effect on Galway, obviously, and there's a memorial down there, I suppose, I think, as well. The city was ravaged. Not only was Galway, but also right along the west coast really was ravaged by what the famine did. But however, it doesn't answer the question. The question they asked was, where did they come from? If the nation's population was falling, declining rapidly during those years, and Dublin's was increasing rapidly, where did they come from? Well, they obviously came from across the nation. Those who didn't make it onto the coffin ships, the sail to New York, to the 5 Points, to Boston, to San Francisco, and all places like that, or ended up in Whitechapel in London, or Liverpool, Birmingham, Manchester, they would have made their way on foot to Dublin, to what was once the most flamboyant city in Europe, next to Paris. Now it becomes the city with the worst slums in Europe.